She woke up before the sun. As she always did, the cold floor of her small room pressing against her bare feet. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the roof, but the silence never brought comfort. Her family had grown used to her dreams being bigger than their world, and sometimes she felt that was exactly why the world seemed so determined to tell her she could never succeed. Every morning, as she walked to school through dusty streets, she passed people who barely noticed her existence. Some smiled kindly, some ignored her, but others were cruel in ways that left deep marks. "Why bother?" they said. "You're nothing special. You'll never get anywhere." She had heard it all before, not just on the streets but from people she was supposed to trust. Teachers who shook their heads at her ambitions, neighbors who whispered about her in ways meant to sting, even relatives who shook their heads when she spoke about her dreams. At school, things were no better. Her uniform was old and patched in several places. Her shoes had soles that bent the wrong way, making walking uncomfortable, but she wore them anyway because there was no choice. She tried to blend in, tried to sit quietly, tried to make herself invisible, but no matter how hard she tried, someone would find a way to remind her of what she was not. "Why do you even try?" a classmate sneered one day, flipping through her notebook full of carefully written notes. "This is useless. You'll never be smart enough." Her heart sank, but she kept writing. Every letter, every word was her small rebellion against a world that refused to see her. Deep down, she knew that giving up would mean letting them win, and she refused to let them win. Still, there were nights when she cried herself to sleep, tears soaking the thin pillow while the ceiling above seemed to mock her dreams. Her family noticed, but their words were never what she wanted to hear. Her mother, tired from long hours of work, said, "Dreams don't fill empty stomachs. Be realistic." Her father, who had his own disappointments, muttered, "Life isn't fair. You'll learn that soon enough." Their love was there in small ways, but it always seemed wrapped in warnings and limits. They didn't want her to be hurt, yet their caution felt like chains around her ambitions. Despite everything, she held on to the small sparks that refused to die. She remembered the first time she realized she wanted more, the first time she felt that there was something inside her that refused to settle. She had been just a little girl, watching someone on television accomplish something extraordinary. The feeling had hit her like lightning. This wasn't just entertainment. It was proof that ordinary people like her, could reach for the stars if they dared. School became a battleground. Every day she had to fight to be taken seriously, to be listened to be seen. Lessons felt harder because she didn't have the same resources others had. Her textbooks were old and worn, some missing pages, some with scribbles in the margins that made learning confusing. Sometimes she stayed behind after class, asking questions, trying to understand while the teacher seemed impatient, as if her desire to learn was an annoyance. And yet, she persisted. There was a quiet resilience in her that no one noticed at first, but it grew with every insult, every dismissal, every moment she chose to keep going. She started small, practicing what she loved in secret, scribbling ideas in old notebooks no one would ever find, learning from books borrowed from the library, from videos she could watch on the neighbor's computer when they were kind enough to let her. These small acts were seeds of her future, tiny victories no one else saw. The ridicule wasn't only verbal. Sometimes it came in the form of isolation. Other children didn't want to sit near her or share projects with her. Teachers grouped her last when forming teams. It felt like every step forward was met with resistance. Yet she learned something important in those moments. Determination was louder than words, stronger than mockery, and more lasting than fear. She could not control the world, but she could control herself. One afternoon, after being laughed at during a class presentation, she walked home with her head low but her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She could feel the eyes of her classmates lingering, some sneering, some indifferent. She wanted to disappear, wanted to vanish from their judgment. But something inside her whispered, "Don't give them the satisfaction." That whisper became a quiet mantra, a tiny shield she held against the storm. Home was no escape either. Money was tight, food sometimes scarce, and arguments were common. Her parents loved her, but the stress of their lives left little room for encouragement. She learned to carry her burdens quietly, to eat when there was food, to sleep when there was rest, and to dream in the spaces no one could see. Her small room became a sanctuary. The walls, though bare, held her secrets, her hopes, and her determination. On her desk she had a lamp, a few notebooks, and a pencil stub. With these simple tools, she began to carve her world, page by page, idea by idea. Sometimes she would catch herself staring out the window at the street below, imagining a different life. She imagined stages where she would speak, classrooms where she would teach, or offices where she would work, places far away from the narrow expectations of her current life. Each vision was fleeting, yet each one was a spark. It was hard to keep believing in something so distant, yet she knew that every journey started with a single stubborn step. The more she worked, the more she realized that her dreams were not just for herself. They were a rebellion against all the people who had told her she was nothing. They were proof to anyone who ever doubted that effort, heart, and courage could change a life. She began to see herself differently, not just as a girl struggling to survive, but as a young woman capable of creating something bigger than her circumstances. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, when she studied by candlelight or borrowed electricity, she would think, maybe they are right. Maybe I am nothing. But those moments were fleeting. They were reminders that the journey was real, that the fight was worth it, and that the people who doubted her would not define her unless she allowed them to. Her determination began to attract attention, small and subtle. A teacher noticed her persistence, complimenting her on a particularly well-written essay. A neighbor smiled when she saw her practicing diligently in the small yard. Even though these gestures were small, they fed her spirit. She realized that while many would doubt her, there were always those who would see her potential if she kept trying. One day, she made a decision. She could no longer let the world dictate her worth. She would work, study, and fight for her dreams in silence if necessary, but she would never stop. Every insult, every dismissal, every eye roll was fuel. Every late night, every extra hour of study, every small success was a brick building the foundation of her future. She realized that the people who had told her she was nothing were wrong, but only if she refused to let their words define her. By the end of that year, she had grown stronger. She had learned more than just lessons from textbooks. She had learned resilience, courage, and the power of silent determination. She had discovered that victory was not always immediate, that some battles were fought in quiet persistence rather than loud confrontations. And she had discovered that even in a world determined to make her feel small, she had the power to rise. The night before the new year, she sat by her window, staring at the stars. She thought about all the people who had doubted her, all the moments she had almost given up, and all the small victories that had kept her going. She whispered to herself, "One day they will see. One day I will show them." And for the first time, the whisper was not fragile or unsure. It was strong, steady, and filled with a promise she intended to keep. Her journey had begun quietly in a small room, with nothing but determination and a will to survive. The world had told her she was nothing, but she had made a decision. She would not just survive. She would rise. And though no one knew it yet, the journey she was beginning would one day move hearts, change minds, and make people cry, not from pity, but from awe. The following morning, she woke with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The small room that had always felt both comforting and confining now seemed like the place where everything could start to change. She had made a decision. She was going to take her first real step toward her dream. No matter how small, no matter how uncertain, no matter how many people said she could not. School had always been a challenge. But that day she walked in with a quiet determination. She chose to focus not on what others said about her, but on what she could do. Her notebook was worn and smudged, but she carried it like a shield. Every page inside contained not just notes and scribbles, but fragments of ambition, little ideas she had refused to let die. She flipped it open as she walked to her desk, her fingers tracing the edges of her pencil. It was not easy. The teacher assigned a project, a presentation on a topic of the student's choice. While other students groaned and complained, she felt a thrill of possibility. Finally, an opportunity to show what she could do, however small. She picked her topic carefully, something that reflected not just her curiosity but her desire to prove that she was capable. Back home, she spread her worn notebook across the small table in the corner. Her parents were tired, but she spoke quietly, explaining her plan. Her father frowned, unsure if her ambitions could survive reality. Her mother sighed, worried about her focusing so much energy on something uncertain, but she ignored their doubts, not in defiance. but because she knew their worries came from love. She had to fight her own battles first. Hours became days. She studied old books from the library, copied ideas into her notebook, practiced speaking aloud even though no one was listening. Her room became her workshop, her sanctuary, her place to grow. Sometimes she stumbled, mispronouncing words or forgetting facts, but she refused to give up. Every mistake became a lesson, every setback a chance to improve. The world outside did not wait for her to be ready. Some of her classmates mocked her when she asked questions or shared her ideas. "Why are you trying so hard?" they asked, as if curiosity and effort were crimes. She could have been hurt, could have let their words sink in, but she learned a small truth. It was not her job to satisfy them. Her focus was not on their approval, but on her own growth. Slowly, people began to notice. A teacher commented on the clarity of her notes. A classmate asked for help understanding a difficult concept. Though these moments were small, they meant more than the loud mockery that had filled the halls before. She realized that effort did not always produce immediate applause, but it planted seeds that could grow in ways no one expected. One afternoon, while she worked on her project, she felt a pang of fear. What if she failed? What if, after all this effort, she fell short? She remembered the faces of the people who had doubted her, the sneers, the whispered words of nothing, and a surge of resolve ran through her. She would not let fear stop her. Failure was a possibility, yes, but inaction was defeat. She picked up her pencil with firmer grip and returned to work. Her routine became a rhythm. Early mornings spent reviewing her notes. Afternoons devoted to research and practice. Evenings where she rehearsed presentations in front of a cracked mirror, imagining an audience that believed in her even if the real world did not. She learned to manage her time, to plan carefully, and to focus on progress rather than perfection. Each day was small but important, and she treated it as though the future depended on it. Because it did. There were setbacks, of course. One day she lost an important reference book she had borrowed from the library. Another day, a classmate accidentally spilled water over her notebook, smudging pages she had worked hard on. Each time her heart sank, but she adapted. She rewrote, researched again, and pressed forward. She learned that setbacks were part of the journey, not signals to quit. Outside of school, life continued to be difficult. Money was scarce. Her parents still worried, often arguing quietly about bills and groceries, and she felt the weight of their struggles even as she pursued her own. Yet she discovered that struggle could be a teacher too. It taught her patience, creativity, and the value of every small achievement. She learned to celebrate little victories. A clean page, a well-practiced sentence, a concept understood. Each one was a step forward, a reminder that she was capable. Her dedication began to create ripples. A younger student who had been shy and unsure began asking her questions. She explained patiently, not for recognition, but because she understood how encouragement could change someone's perspective. She realized that helping others became part of her own growth, a reflection of the strength she was building. As the day of the project presentation approached, nerves crept in. She felt the weight of expectations, her own and those of people who had quietly noticed her effort. She practiced relentlessly, standing in front of her mirror, imagining her voice reaching across the room, clear and steady. She worked on her gestures, her tone, her pauses. She knew that confidence would not come automatically. It had to be built, like a structure crafted carefully from the ground up. The day finally arrived. Her heart raced as she walked into the classroom, holding her notebook and notes like armor. Some classmates whispered, some rolled their eyes, but she focused on herself. She began her presentation, voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each word. Her research was thorough, her explanations clear, her passion visible. She felt the connection with the room, a subtle shift as people began to pay attention. When she finished, there was silence for a moment. Then, to her quiet amazement, a teacher nodded. A few classmates clapped softly, and one student said, "I didn't expect that. You did really well." Her heart lifted. It was a small victory, but it was real. It was proof that her effort mattered, that perseverance could produce results even if only a few people noticed. That night, back in her small room, she reflected on the day. The fear, the doubts, the endless hours of work, all of it had led to this moment. She realized that victories were not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes they were quiet acknowledgments of progress, steps forward that built confidence and courage. She wrote in her notebook, carefully documenting what she had learned. what had worked, and what she wanted to do next. The experience gave her more than recognition. It gave her belief. She began to see that her dreams, though still distant, were possible. She learned that effort, even in the face of discouragement, could change the way others saw her and, more importantly, how she saw herself. Every day of hard work, every moment she refused to give up, became proof that she was more than what the world had told her. She shared her experience quietly with her parents. They listened, pride slowly replacing worry on their faces. Her mother said, "I didn't know you had it in you." Her father simply nodded, eyes misty. It was not just the recognition from school that mattered, but the recognition from those closest to her, who had always wanted her to be safe, if not extraordinary. She realized that showing them her determination was as important as proving herself to the wider world. The weeks that followed were filled with small but meaningful growth. She continued her studies with renewed vigor, exploring topics that fascinated her. She joined small community groups and took on tasks others overlooked. Her reputation shifted slowly. People began to respect her dedication, and some even sought her out for advice or help. She felt a quiet satisfaction that came not from attention, but from knowing she was growing step by step, in ways that no one could take away. There were still challenges, of course. Not everyone was impressed. Some classmates still whispered, some teachers still doubted. But she had learned an essential lesson. Her worth was not determined by their opinions. Her value came from effort, persistence, and the courage to continue. She began to understand that life would always present obstacles, but with determination, those obstacles could be transformed into opportunities. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the streets glowed with soft golden light, she sat by her window with her notebook. She reflected on how far she had come since those early mornings when she felt invisible and dismissed. She had taken her first real steps, faced doubt, endured mistakes, and experienced the small taste of success that confirmed her potential. She knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt a sense of control over her path. She whispered to herself, "I can do this. I will do this." It was no longer a fragile hope. It was a commitment, a promise, a seed of courage that would grow through the trials ahead. She realized that small steps taken every day with effort and heart were powerful. They could carry her further than she ever imagined, building a foundation strong enough to support her dreams. In that moment, she understood something profound. The world could continue to doubt her, but she could continue to rise. And rising, she learned, was not just about reaching a destination. It was about learning, growing, and proving to herself that she was capable. Every effort, every setback, every quiet victory was shaping the person she was becoming. A person who refused to let discouragement define her, who chose to act even when it was hard, who believed that dreams were worth fighting for. And so, with her notebook beside her and the stars beginning to sparkle above, she made a silent vow. She would keep moving forward step by step, project by project, effort by effort. The world had told her she was nothing, but she was learning that nothing could stop her as long as she refused to give up. The small victories of today were just the beginning. The journey ahead promised greater challenges, greater risks, and greater triumphs, and she was ready to meet them all. The months that followed her first small victory brought both hope and unexpected challenges. At first, she felt unstoppable. Every new task seemed like an opportunity. Every small accomplishment like proof that she was moving closer to her dream. But life, as she was learning, had a way of testing those who dared to rise. One afternoon, as she returned home from school, she noticed a letter on the table. It was from a program she had applied to months ago, something she had hoped would open doors for her future. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The words inside were simple but crushing. "We regret to inform you." She sank into the chair, staring at the page. Months of effort, sleepless nights, and dreams of this opportunity seemed to vanish in an instant. She felt hollow, as if the world had reached inside her chest and pulled out her courage. That night, she sat alone in her small room, her notebook untouched. Tears blurred her vision as she thought about all the times she had been told she was nothing. "Maybe they were right," she whispered, her voice small and broken. The doubts that she had fought so hard to silence were loud now, echoing in the quiet corners of her mind. She felt a weight she could not lift, as if all the effort she had made was meaningless. The next day at school, things did not get easier. Some classmates laughed quietly when they saw her glum expression. One student even said, "Told you, you can't do anything right." Even teachers, who had once acknowledged her effort, seemed preoccupied with other students, their encouragement forgotten in the rush of the day. She felt invisible and small, swallowed by the world that refused to notice her struggle. But amid the discouragement, there were moments that reminded her why she had started. One younger student approached her during lunch. "I liked your presentation last time," the child said softly. "It made me want to try harder too." She looked at the small face, so earnest and sincere, and felt a spark of warmth. It was enough to remind her that even when the world seemed cruel, her actions mattered. She was making a difference, even if it was only small and unseen by most. Despite this, the rejection from the program haunted her. She found herself questioning everything, her choices, her methods, even her own abilities. Was she really as capable as she thought? Was her persistence only a fool's hope? At night, the walls of her room seemed to press in, and the ceiling, once a space for dreams, now felt like a barrier she could never break through. She knew she could not give up, but the weight of failure was nearly unbearable. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. She had been preparing for another competition, something she had hoped would redeem her after the rejection. Hours of preparation had gone into it, research, practice, memorization, and rehearsals. But when the moment arrived, nerves overtook her. Her voice shook, words slipped from her memory, and what she had hoped would be a display of skill and determination turned into a blur of mistakes. She walked off the stage humiliated, and tears filled her eyes. For days she avoided her notebook, her books, and even the small sanctuary of her room. She wandered through the house and streets, feeling lost and defeated. The words of everyone who had doubted her replayed in her mind, louder than ever. "You're nothing." She wondered if all her effort had been wasted, if the world had finally proven her wrong. For the first time, the idea of giving up felt tempting, almost comforting. But amid the despair, she found a small, quiet voice inside herself. It was not loud or confident, but it was persistent. "You are more than this moment," it whispered. "You cannot stop now." She realized that her dreams had not disappeared. They were still there, waiting for her to claim them. The failures were painful, but they did not define her. What defined her was the courage to try again, even when everything seemed against her. She began slowly, taking tiny steps to rebuild her confidence. She returned to her studies, not with the pressure of immediate success, but with the goal of learning and improving. She practiced in secret, reviewing mistakes and figuring out how to do better next time. Each small effort was a step back toward the person she wanted to be, resilient, capable, and unafraid of failure. The support of a rare mentor helped too. One of her teachers, noticing her absence and quiet despair, reached out. "I see your effort," the teacher said. "I know what you're capable of. Don't let one failure define you." The words were simple, but they carried weight she had almost forgotten. She realized that even in a world full of doubt, there were people who believed in her potential. It was not a guarantee of success, but it was enough to remind her that she was not alone. Gradually, she began to accept that failure was part of the journey. It was not a reflection of her worth, but a challenge to her persistence. She learned to separate her value as a person from the outcomes of her efforts. This shift in perspective did not make setbacks less painful, but it gave her the strength to continue. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Her family noticed the change, though they did not fully understand it. Her mother watched her stay up late, working quietly by candlelight. Her father saw her practice, stumble, and then try again. They began to see that her determination was not fragile, that her dreams were not childish fantasies, but a real force shaping her actions. Their worry softened into quiet pride, even if they did not say it aloud. She also found strength in her own reflection. Every morning she looked at herself in the mirror and reminded herself of the steps she had already taken. She thought about the small victories, the moments of progress, and the people she had quietly inspired. Each reflection became a source of resilience, a reminder that she had survived failure before and could survive it again. One turning point came unexpectedly. While helping the younger student she had inspired earlier, she realized something profound. Teaching someone else, showing them what was possible, gave her hope and confidence. By sharing her knowledge, she saw her own growth mirrored in their eyes. It reminded her that her journey was not only about her success, but about the impact she could have on others. With this renewed perspective, she returned to her projects with careful planning. She set small, achievable goals, celebrating each milestone without waiting for grand recognition. She practiced presentations quietly, rehearsed explanations, and reviewed her work meticulously. Slowly, the fear of failure diminished, replaced by a steady confidence that came from preparation and persistence. Life continued to test her. She faced criticism from peers, misunderstanding from teachers, and constant financial limitations. There were days when she wanted to retreat, to hide from the world that seemed eager to see her fail. But now she had learned to confront these challenges with patience and strategy. Every obstacle became a puzzle to solve, every challenge a chance to strengthen her resolve. Her friends and peers began to notice the change. Some were surprised at her resilience, others quietly admired her focus, and a few even sought advice or encouragement from her. She had become someone who could face disappointment and still rise, and people were starting to see that strength. But she remained humble, understanding that the journey was not about recognition, but about growth and perseverance. Late one night, as she sat by the window, rain tapping softly on the glass, she reflected on her journey so far. She remembered the letters of rejection, the failed presentations, the harsh words, and the isolation. And yet she also remembered the small victories, the compliments from teachers, the gratitude of the younger students, the moments when she had overcome doubt. She realized that each step, whether forward or backward, had shaped her into someone stronger, more determined, and more capable than she had ever imagined. She understood, finally, that breaking points were not the end. They were opportunities to discover hidden strength. Painful as they were, they revealed what she was truly capable of enduring. Every time she had felt like giving up, she had chosen to keep moving, and that choice had built the foundation for future success. She realized that resilience was not about never falling. It was about rising every time she did. The next morning, she returned to her studies with renewed determination. She approached each task with focus, using what she had learned from failure to guide her decisions. She no longer feared mistakes. Instead, she embraced them as teachers. Every misstep became a lesson, every setback an opportunity to grow stronger. She was learning that the path to success was rarely straight, and that perseverance often mattered more than immediate results. By the end of that challenging season, she had grown not only in skill but in character. She was more patient, more disciplined, and more confident in her ability to face adversity. The failures that had once crushed her now felt like milestones, each marking a step closer to the person she wanted to become. She had faced the breaking point, and instead of shattering, she had emerged stronger, ready for the next challenge. As she prepared for the upcoming competition, she felt a calm determination. She knew the odds were still against her, but she had learned that preparation, persistence, and belief in herself could carry her further than fear and doubt ever could. She held her notebook close, practiced silently, and whispered to herself, "This time I am ready." The journey was far from over, but she had discovered a truth that would guide her forever. No matter how many times the world said she was nothing, she had the power to rise. She had learned that courage was forged in struggle, that strength was built in the moments when giving up seemed easiest, and that every small step forward was a victory in itself. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that the greatest triumphs were still ahead, waiting for the determination that had been quietly growing all along. After months of struggle, failure, and quiet reflection, she began to notice something different within herself. It was subtle at first, a steadiness in her hands, a clarity in her thoughts, a patience she hadn't known she possessed. The fear that had once haunted her every step was no longer as loud. She was still cautious, still aware of the obstacles, but she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the determination to move forward despite it. Her days became filled with purpose. Every morning, she woke before the sun, as she had always done, but now she approached her tasks with calm determination rather than restless anxiety. Her small room, once a place where dreams struggled to survive, had transformed into a workshop of progress. Her desk was crowded with notebooks, sketches, and small notes of encouragement she had written to herself. Each item was a reminder that her efforts were real, that she was capable of achieving more than she had ever imagined. At school, she took on responsibilities that she had previously avoided out of fear of failure. She volunteered for projects, joined study groups, and quietly helped younger students who struggled as she had once struggled. The small acts of leadership that she performed without recognition gradually began to change how people saw her. Teachers who had once doubted her now asked for her input, and classmates who had ignored her began to respect her focus and dedication. It was a quiet transformation, but it was undeniable. One of the most important changes was within her own mind. She no longer measured her worth by the approval or rejection of others. Instead, she focused on progress, learning to celebrate small victories and to view setbacks as temporary challenges rather than final judgments. Each day became a lesson in resilience, teaching her that growth often came slowly, in ways that were not immediately visible. The first real sign that her efforts were paying off came unexpectedly. The school announced a science fair, open to all students, with judges who were respected community members. She had hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to compete again after past failures, but she remembered the words of her mentor, "Don't let one failure define you." Taking a deep breath, she decided to participate, determined to give it her all. She worked tirelessly on her project. Nights were spent researching, testing ideas, and documenting results. Days were devoted to refining her presentation, rehearsing explanations, and anticipating questions that judges might ask. She faced setbacks along the way, equipment that didn't work, experiments that failed. But each obstacle was met with problem-solving and persistence. She had learned from her past mistakes that preparation and effort could overcome fear and uncertainty. As the day of the science fair approached, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She carried her project to the venue, carefully setting it up while other students buzzed around, talking about their own displays. Some sneered, trying to intimidate her, but she held her focus. She reminded herself that this was about her growth, not their opinions. The months of effort, the nights spent studying, the failures she had endured, all of it had prepared her for this moment. When the judges arrived, she began her presentation. At first, her voice was steady but slightly tentative, yet as she explained her research, her confidence grew. She answered questions with clarity and thoughtfulness, demonstrating not only her knowledge but also her persistence. The judges nodded, asked follow-up questions, and seemed genuinely impressed by the depth of her understanding and the care she had put into the project. By the end of the day, she had received one of the top awards. The applause from the judges and the audience was not just recognition of her work, but validation of her perseverance. She felt a rush of emotion, relief, pride, and gratitude. Her journey from failure and self-doubt to success had been long and difficult, but in that moment every struggle felt worthwhile. The experience gave her more than just an award. It gave her a sense of belonging, a feeling that her efforts were meaningful, and that she had a place in the world where her skills and determination were valued. It was proof that the work she had done in secret, the hours spent alone with her notebook and experiments, could create real change and recognition. She realized that persistence could turn dreams into reality, one small step at a time. Encouraged by this success, she began taking on new challenges. She sought opportunities outside of school, volunteering in community programs, helping with local events, and taking on tasks that required both initiative and leadership. Each experience helped her build skills, confidence, and a network of people who respected her dedication. The world that had once told her she was nothing now began to take notice, not because she demanded attention, but because her actions spoke louder than any words. Her relationships also grew stronger. She became a source of support for younger students, guiding them through challenges and encouraging them to pursue their interests. Friends who had once been distant grew closer, inspired by her determination and kindness. Her family, once cautious and concerned, began to show pride in quiet ways. A nod, a smile, or a simple acknowledgement of her achievements. She had learned that success was not just about personal accomplishments, but also about lifting others as she rose. Despite the progress, she remained humble. She knew that the journey was far from over and that challenges would continue to arise. But she also knew that she had the tools to face them: resilience, focus, and the belief in her own abilities. Each day was an opportunity to learn, grow, and demonstrate that determination could overcome obstacles. She had discovered that success was not a single moment, but a series of consistent efforts, each building upon the last. One evening, as she sat by her window, reviewing notes for an upcoming project, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the nights of doubt, the moments of failure, the people who had told her she was nothing. She realized that every struggle had shaped her, teaching lessons that no easy success could have offered. Each hardship had strengthened her resolve, each failure had refined her focus, and each small victory had built the confidence she now carried. She also thought about the people who had inspired her along the way, the teacher who had believed in her, the younger student who had reminded her of her impact, and even those who doubted her. They had all played a role in shaping her journey. She had learned to take the good, learn from the bad, and use both to propel herself forward. Her journey was no longer just about proving others wrong. It was about becoming the best version of herself. Her dedication began to attract broader recognition. Invitations came to speak at school events, share her experiences with peers, and mentor students interested in similar projects. She approached each opportunity with humility and focus, using it not to boast, but to inspire and guide others. She realized that true success was not measured by awards alone, but by the ability to influence, encourage, and create change around her. The culmination of her efforts came when she was nominated for a larger community recognition program. This was an opportunity that could open doors to scholarships, mentorship, and greater resources for her future. She approached it with careful preparation, reviewing her previous projects, rehearsing presentations, and reflecting on the lessons she had learned from past failures. She understood that this was more than just a competition. It was a chance to demonstrate the growth she had achieved through persistence, courage, and hard work. When the day arrived, she presented her work to a panel of judges, community leaders, and peers. Her voice was calm, her explanations clear, and her passion evident. She spoke not only about her project but also about the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the failures, the perseverance, and the quiet determination to rise above doubt. Her story resonated with the audience, who listened with rapt attention, some moved by the courage and resilience she displayed. At the end of the event, she was awarded the top recognition. The applause was thunderous, but it was the emotional reactions of the audience that stayed with her. The smiles, the nods, the tears in some eyes. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not because of the award itself, but because her journey had finally touched the hearts of others. She had transformed doubt and struggle into inspiration, not just for herself, but for everyone who witnessed her determination. That night, back in her room, she reflected on the journey so far. The victories were sweet, but the lessons were sweeter. She understood that resilience, patience, and courage were more valuable than any recognition. She realized that success was not simply reaching a goal, but continuing to grow, inspire, and face new challenges with determination and grace. Her family joined her quietly, pride evident in their eyes. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "I always knew you could do it." Her father smiled, his voice catching as he said, "You've come so far. Keep going." She understood that this recognition was not just hers. It belonged to everyone who had supported, doubted, and challenged her along the way. Every moment had contributed to the person she had become. With each success, she continued to set higher goals, understanding that the journey was ongoing. She learned that rising above challenges was not a single achievement, but a lifelong practice. Each step forward built confidence, skill, and resilience. She had discovered that perseverance, when paired with focus and heart, could transform obstacles into opportunities and doubt into motivation. As she looked out of her window at the quiet streets below, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." She knew that greater challenges awaited, but she also knew that she had the strength, wisdom, and courage to meet them. The small victories of the past had prepared her for the larger battles ahead, and she felt ready to face them with determination and grace. Her journey had evolved from a struggle for recognition to a path of inspiration. She had learned that rising above was not just about personal achievement, but about creating hope and opportunity for others. She had become a symbol of perseverance, a living reminder that even in the face of doubt, failure, and hardship, one could rise and make a difference. And so, with her notebooks filled with ideas, her mind focused on the future, and her heart steady with determination, she prepared for the next chapter of her journey. She had learned that life would always bring obstacles, but she had also learned that persistence, courage, and belief in oneself were more powerful than any challenge. The victories she had achieved were proof that the world could not define her, and that the person she was becoming was capable of greatness beyond imagination. The day she had been quietly preparing for finally arrived. It was the biggest opportunity she had ever faced, one that could change the course of her future in ways she had dreamed about since she was a child. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, building on every lesson, every setback, every small victory she had experienced along the way. Yet even as she stood outside the venue waiting for the event to begin, a small knot of nerves twisted in her stomach. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of all she had overcome. The failures, the rejections, the nights of doubt, they had shaped her into someone stronger, more focused, and more resilient. She carried the weight of those experiences like a shield, not a burden. Each step she had taken had prepared her for this moment, and she refused to let fear define her. As she walked into the hall, the room buzzed with anticipation. Students from all over had gathered, along with teachers, community leaders, and guests who had come to witness the presentations. She set up her project carefully, making sure every detail was perfect. She felt the familiar sting of doubt when she noticed other competitors with polished displays and confident smiles, but she reminded herself that comparison was meaningless. Her journey was unique, and her preparation, effort, and perseverance could not be measured by anyone else. The competition began, and one by one, students presented their projects. She watched quietly, taking notes in her mind, observing how each person engaged with the judges and the audience. Some presentations were flawless, others faltered, but none of it mattered to her in the same way her own work would. She focused on what she had created, the months of effort, the countless hours of study, and the courage it had taken to rise again after failures. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward with a calm determination that had been honed over years of struggle. Her hands were steady, her voice clear, and her posture confident. As she explained her project, she could feel the room quiet, the judge's attention fixed on her. She spoke not only about her research, but about the journey that had brought her here, the failures she had endured, the lessons she had learned, and the persistence that had carried her through moments of doubt. Questions came from the judges, thoughtful and challenging, but she answered each one with clarity and poise. She could see the nods of approval, the subtle smiles, the recognition in their eyes. It was more than validation of her work. It was acknowledgement of her perseverance, her courage, and the growth she had achieved. With every answer, she felt a surge of confidence, a quiet pride in the journey that had brought her to this point. When the presentations concluded, the judges took time to deliberate. The room buzzed with whispered conversations, students sharing guesses and parents quietly cheering for their children. She sat quietly, her heart racing, remembering the nights when she had felt invisible, dismissed, and discouraged. Those feelings were still a part of her story, but they no longer held power over her. She had learned that her worth was not defined by recognition alone, but by the courage to keep moving forward. Finally, the moment arrived. The head judge took the microphone and began announcing the awards. Her heart pounded in her chest as the names were read, each one building anticipation. When they announced her name as the first-place winner, the world seemed to pause for a moment. Applause filled the hall, echoing in a way that felt surreal after years of struggle and silence. She felt tears prick her eyes, not from relief alone, but from the recognition of everything it had taken to reach this moment. As she walked forward to accept the award, she could see the faces of those who had doubted her, the classmates who had laughed, the teachers who had once questioned her potential. Some looked surprised, some proud, and some moved to tears. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a turning point where the world she had once felt shut out of began to see her in a new light. She realized that her victory was not just about personal achievement. It was a statement, a proof that perseverance, courage, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt and adversity. The applause continued as she held the award, feeling its weight in her hands. She looked out at the audience, at the faces of students, teachers, and community members, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. She remembered the nights of tears, the failures, the moments when giving up had seemed easier than trying. Every setback had been a stepping stone, every challenge a lesson, and every quiet effort a foundation for this triumph. Her parents were in the audience, and she could see the pride in their eyes. Her mother wiped away tears, and her father nodded, a quiet smile on his face. They had always worried for her, questioned her choices, and hoped she would be safe, but now they understood the depth of her determination and the strength it had taken to rise above doubt. She had not only achieved her dream, she had earned their pride and respect in a way that words could barely capture. As she stepped down from the stage, students came up to congratulate her. Some she had known for years, some she had never spoken to before, but their recognition felt genuine. They asked how she had done it, how she had stayed focused, and how she had overcome the challenges that seemed impossible. She answered simply, sharing the truth she had discovered over years of struggle. Persistence, effort, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt, fear, and failure. That night, back in her small room, she held the award carefully, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She reflected on the moments of despair, the nights of tears, and the countless times she had faced rejection. She realized that each of those moments had been necessary, shaping her resilience, sharpening her focus, and teaching her the value of quiet determination. The award was not just recognition of her achievement, but of her courage, her persistence, and the journey itself. She also thought about the people who had inspired her along the way, the teacher who had believed in her, the younger students she had helped, and even those who had doubted her. They had all played a role in her story, providing lessons, challenges, and encouragement that had shaped her path. She realized that every interaction, positive or negative, had contributed to the person she had become, and that her victory was as much about the journey as the destination. Over the following days, her story began to spread. Teachers shared it with colleagues, students talked about it among themselves, and community members were inspired by her determination. People who had once ignored or doubted her now recognized her courage and persistence. She became a symbol of hope for those who faced similar struggles, a living example that even when the world says you are nothing, you can rise and achieve greatness. Despite the recognition, she remained humble. She understood that success was not a final point but a continuous journey. She continued to work hard, to learn and to grow, knowing that every challenge ahead would require the same determination and courage she had shown so far. She had achieved a milestone, but the journey was ongoing, filled with opportunities to continue rising and inspiring others along the way. Her family, once cautious and worried, now stood quietly by her side, supporting her dreams with pride rather than concern. They had seen the transformation, the resilience, and the courage she had developed through years of struggle. Their support became a steady foundation, reminding her that even as she pursued her goals independently, she was never truly alone. The emotional impact of her victory extended beyond the competition. Students who had once mocked her now approached her for guidance and encouragement. Teachers who had doubted her potential now sought her advice on how to inspire other students. She realized that her journey had created a ripple effect, showing others that determination and courage could lead to success, and that even the smallest efforts could inspire change. One evening, as she sat by the window holding the award, she reflected on the long path that had brought her here. She thought about the early mornings, the late nights, the moments of doubt, and the small victories that had gradually built her confidence. She understood that each step, no matter how small, had been essential. The journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary, shaping her into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. She whispered to herself, "I did it." I rose. It was a quiet statement, but it carried the weight of years of struggle, perseverance, and hope. She knew that the world could still present challenges, that doubt and fear could return, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. Her journey had taught her that victory was not only about achieving a goal, but about the courage to keep moving forward despite obstacles. In the weeks that followed, she continued to grow and inspire. She took on new projects, shared her story with younger students, and continued to pursue her dreams with the same dedication and focus that had carried her this far. Her victory was no longer just an award on a shelf. It was a living testament to the power of resilience. determination, and belief in oneself. She became a role model, not because she had achieved success easily, but because she had achieved it through struggle, perseverance, and unwavering courage. People looked to her story for hope, motivation, and proof that even in the face of doubt, rejection, and failure, it was possible to rise and achieve greatness. And so, as she looked out at the horizon from her small room, she felt a sense of peace and purpose. The journey had been long, filled with challenges and setbacks, but it had also been filled with growth, learning, and quiet victories. She understood that life would continue to present obstacles, but she was ready to face them with courage, determination, and heart. Her story was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had faced doubt, rejection, and struggle and had found the courage to rise. She had proven, first to herself and then to the world, that even when people say you are nothing, persistence, belief, and resilience can lead to triumph. Her victory was not just a moment in time. It was a legacy of hope, courage, and inspiration that would live on far beyond the applause, awards, and recognition. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. The world had once told her she was nothing, but now she knew the truth. She was capable, strong, and unstoppable. And the best part was that her journey was just beginning.